Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It is not just altruistic. It's not just to protect our family and our friends, but it protects you.
New vaccine mandates and more COVID booster shots, all fueled by the Delta variant. Also,
personally, it is very, very hard for them and for families to accept what happens.
Blaming the province for failing to protect the elderly during BC's record-breaking heat wave. And why new training for semi-truck drivers could save hundreds of lives.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. BC is tightening its COVID requirements for staff and visitors at some of the most vulnerable places in the province. Our Tanya Fletcher is live with more on today's update. Tanya, October 12th, that's the deadline for two things. What are they?
So, Anita, next Tuesday is when visitors to long-term care homes and acute care facilities will be required to show proof of double vaccination. And next Tuesday is also the deadline for when all staff working in those facilities must have received at least their first shot. And if they don't,
People who are ineligible to work after October 12th because they have not yet received at least one dose will be off work as of that day without pay. If you do then decide to get your first dose, it will be 7 days before you're able to return to work with additional precautions in place.
we should also mention the province is now offering a third dose to another group of immunocompromised people. This time there's about 100,000 of them. Many of them are cancer patients, and you can go to our website to check the full list of who that applies to.
Okay, and Tanya, we're also hearing about other workplace vaccine mandates. What are those all about?
Yeah, so mandatory vaccinations are coming to BC's 30,000 public service employees. That was announced today. That's largely civil servants, and they must be fully vaccinated by November 22nd. That does not include school staff, though, and health officials were pressed again on why there's no requirement for teachers, especially since groups like the BCTF have said they would support such a mandate. So until now, the province has really said it's focusing vaccine mandates through orders on high-risk vulnerable settings like in the healthcare sector. But today we heard really the first indication that the province may be leaving the door open for individual school districts to perhaps make those decisions themselves.
The Education Ministry, my colleague, Minister of Education Jennifer Whiteside, is immediately convening an advisory committee, an ad hoc one with BCPC and other partners to develop common principles, standards and guidelines to support boards with the potential implementation of vaccine mandates. The committee will work quickly to get these materials to boards as soon as possible.
They were also asked about vaccine requirements for, say, industrial camps like up at the site Seaworks site, and Dr. Henry said she'd absolutely recommend that BC Hydro bring in vaccine mandates for its workers, but so far that's really being left up to them. There's no indication that that would be blanketed by a public health order. Anita.
Tanya Fletcher live tonight. Thanks, Tanya. And BC's daily COVID-19 cases have been trending slightly lower in the last few days. Fewer than 600 people have tested positive since yesterday. And for the first time in almost a month, there are no new deaths to report. Hospitalizations have increased, however, up to 345 today. This past week, around 78% of those in hospital are not fully vaccinated. At least 2 more people are in intensive care. That's up to 144. And of those, 119 are completely unvaccinated. Well, BC health officials are asking for calm and patience as stress builds around whether Canadians with mixed COVID vaccines will be allowed to enter other countries, including the U.S.
We are working very closely with counterparts in the U.S. Centers for Disease Control to make sure that these highly effective combinations are recognized. So please be patient.
The statement comes after the Association of Canadian Travel Agencies urged the federal government to do more to sway countries that are unvaccinated or who are unconvinced that mixed doses offer enough protection. Officials are working with colleagues in the UK, EU, and several vacation destination countries to ensure more recognize mixed vaccines. Henry expects to have an update in the next few weeks. Well, accusations tonight against the province for failing to protect people during BC's record-breaking heat wave. Human Rights Watch has issued a report looking into the government's response after hundreds of people died. As the CBC's Michelle Gassoub reports, it finds the province could have saved elderly people and those with disabilities.
Staying cool during the heat dome was near impossible for Paul Kahn, who didn't have the option of heading to a cooling centre.
By the second day of the heat dome, my feet swelled up, almost like balloons. My legs started hurting a lot.
Now, Human Rights Watch says the BC government failed to protect elderly people and those living with disabilities.
We heard that they were experiencing really significant and incredible physical and mental health impacts as a result of the heat, but also as a result of their fear and lack of trust in the government's ability to be there for them.
569 people in BC died sudden heat-related deaths in June and July as temperatures soared above 40 degrees. The report leading to harsh words in question period today.
So today, can the Premier explain his government's failure to respond effectively to the deadliest weather situation in Canadian history?
At the height of the heat, wait times for an ambulance sometimes stretched to 90 minutes. The province says since then it's hired more paramedics across the province.
Personally, it is very, very hard for them and for families to accept what happens. And so we have to respond to that by saying it isn't a 1 in 1,000 event any longer. It's our current reality, and make ourselves more resilient.
Human Rights Watch says it hopes the report will be a wake-up call about the need for targeted supports.
I think many disabled people during the heat dome, because of poverty and because of depending on others to survive, are presented with these impossible choices. Damage you, damage you don't.
With climate change, events like the summer's extreme heat will only become more frequent.
The voices and experiences of people, particularly at risk, really need to be at the center of these policies, and so that we can avoid future deaths and further catastrophe.
The province said in July it would announce what lessons were learned from the heat dome. Today it says that review is still underway. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, there's relief on the Nanaimo River where salmon are returning to spawn with the help of recent rains. This summer's extreme heat killed off many of the endangered early sockeye there.
It's the biggest die-off I've seen. It's just the way the river got up almost linked to 25 degrees, so salmon can't handle that time of year, especially with the low flows.
Hatchery staff are trying to help by collecting the eggs of returning salmon. The good news is it's not just sockeye coming back. They're also seeing promising numbers of other species like Chinook and coho. Still, it's expected to be years before the full impact of June's heat wave on salmon will be fully known. The Transportation Safety Board is investigating after a fatal helicopter crash in a remote area of the Sunshine Coast. The chopper went down around 2 p.m. yesterday, 40 kilometers north of Sechelt. The pilot was the only person on board. The TSB says the aircraft was being used in a logging operation. Witnesses found some debris, but most of the chopper sank in the deep water. A search for the pilot's body continues in the area. And a man is in serious condition in hospital tonight after a police-involved shooting in Richmond. Police were responding to calls about a man with a weapon on Turnell Street near Bennett Road around 1:30. RCMP say officers engaged with the man and shots were fired by police. The IIO is investigating the incident and the actions of the officers involved. A 24-year-old homeless man is suffering injuries to his face and head after an unprovoked attack in downtown Nanaimo. Witnesses say the man was sitting on the road late Saturday evening when 3 men dressed in dark clothing approached him, asked a question, and then hit him with what appeared to be a metal pipe.
Some concern that this was a randomized attack on a homeless person. We have had some of those this year.
The suspects were seen getting into a black minivan and driving away. This is the second attack on a homeless person in Nanaimo in 3 months. Well, BC film workers are paying close attention to their U.S. counterparts who have voted overwhelmingly in favor of strike action if they can't reach an agreement with producers on a new contract. The two sides agreed to meet today for the first time in weeks. The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees represents 60,000 off-screen workers like camera operators, makeup artists, and production assistants. The U.S. union is asking for a reduction in work hours and more pay for workers on streaming projects. BC's local union says at least half the productions here employ American members, and if there's a strike, those workers would be expected to honor it. Well, the training required to become a semi-truck driver in BC is ramping up. The move comes after families of the Humboldt Broncos bus crash pushed the government to bring in more robust rules. As Anita Bathe reports, the hope is the changes will prevent some of the deaths that happen each year involving big rigs.
Getting behind the wheel of one of these hasn't always required much training, and that's led to hundreds of people being killed in British Columbia. Until now, to take the truck driving road test, you've had to do 2 knowledge tests and an air brake course. No mandatory practice hours required.
If everything was perfect, no yellow lights, no other traffic when you wanted to turn and so forth, you might get very, very lucky and pass it. But when you got into other conditions, you couldn't handle it.
That's now changing with mandatory entry-level training known as MELT, 140 minimum hours of mandatory teaching on the road, in the yard, and learning theory in the classroom.
We can really get into the finer points of truck driving.
Part of the new requirements for BC drivers, learning to chain up their tires. That's because many truck drivers are getting stuck on snowy mountain paths like the Coquihalla.
When people come for training right now, they are unaware of what's going on in the mountains, how to go up the hill, how to go down the hill.
And to get more comfortable with that, drivers here have to have more minimum practice hours compared to other MELT programs in Canada. Welcoming news for the parents of Logan Hunter, one of the 16 killed in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash in 2018. They've been tirelessly advocating for change to BC's semi-truck licensing system.
We're doing this for all the survivors of the Humboldt bus crash and all the souls that were taken. And we're hoping that these small changes will make them proud that their lives weren't all lost in vain.
They want to prevent another tragedy.
We do believe it could have been prevented had there been more experience and more training happened before. And this is why we're so happy that MELT is happening.
The new training does not come cheap. What costed about $5,000 at some schools will now cost new drivers around $15,000. And while the costs may be a deterrent, BC's Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure says you can't put a price on safety, and says there are grants available.
We've talked to the industry. They want better trained drivers who have more confidence day one before they pull a really large rig down a highway.
And for Ginny and Lawrence Hunter, they're looking for something positive to develop out of their personal tragedy.
Logan and those people got on that bus that day. They trusted that they would arrive safely. And we want to increase that level of trust.
And while they feel this new training is the first step towards safer roads in Canada's West, the hope is more national regulations will follow suit. Anita Bathe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, if you're riding a bus, SkyTrain, or C-Bus, you'll soon be able to take advantage of free Wi-Fi. TransLink is starting with a handful of buses, trains, and stops. Right now, it includes 6 rapid buses, 3 SkyTrains, and 2 hubs at Edmund Station and the Carvolth Exchange in Langley. TransLink eventually wants to activate Wi-Fi throughout its system, but a full rollout isn't expected until 2026. Posters and signage will be on display at vehicles and hubs where the Wi-Fi is available. A Bowen Island woman got quite a surprise while out for a sunset paddle on Sunday. And she didn't drop her phone. Lisa Bromham went to snap a photo of the sunset and got a humpback whale as well. After she paddled to shore, people watching said the animal appeared to follow her. And a school of dolphins also zoomed by. Several humpbacks visited Horseshoe Bay last Saturday, and she says Howe Sound appears more alive with whales, herring, and sea lions.
You know, the open ocean is an incredible ecosystem, and it's an incredibly difficult ecosystem to get out and study.
And UBC researchers have discovered West Coast waters are also alive with a new type of killer whale known as outer coast transient whales. These mammals have been found deep in sea habitats, mostly between Central California and Oregon. They were identified after analyzing more than 100,000 photos. 26 of the outer coast whales have been spotted off Vancouver Island. So great to see the whales thriving after, so much tragedy that they've had in the whale community.
Yeah, I know. I love that story today. We really needed some good news for the orca pods. I think we've all been following that journey. I don't have the greatest news in the forecast. I'll just lay it all out. We have more drizzle, more rain, more cooler temperatures in the forecast. I mean, some of us love it. It's a nice excuse to be curled up indoors, a pitter patter of rain in the morning. Well, we've got lots more of that in the forecast. Let me take you to the satellite and radar where I'm tracking more showers moving in from the southwest. Seen some lightning strikes on my obnoxiously large lightning detector. I really wanted you to see where they were striking. It looks like just north of Chilliwack and up towards the Sunshine Coast. Seen a few strikes tonight. It is an unsettled environment for the south coast. That same low is injecting moisture into the cold air, settling down across northern sections of the province. That blue in the radar is snow. Prince George up towards Dawson Creek, we are seeing rain change over to snow as we speak. The warnings for Highway 97 up towards Pine Pass and through Dawson Creek, 20 centimeters by tomorrow afternoon. We're not expecting to see the snow in our neck of the woods yet, but those thunderstorms, well, those will continue in the forecast. It's going to be a wet, stormy, windy, and cool forecast for tomorrow, or at least, Anita, that's what the computer models are saying. Gotta love computers. And that's my segue to this next story, which I love. A Vancouver restaurant has found a unique solution to being short-staffed.
Yes, they've gone robotic. Take a look.
Meet Robbie, a robot restaurant server. This Victoria restaurant purchased it amid a worker shortage on Vancouver Island.
Usually for buffet, I work alone. So she's very handy because I can do two things at one time, and she's kind of works as an extension of me.
Robbie can be programmed to deliver food, take away dishes, and even play music. The restaurant says it's not replacing human servers. It can't take orders or talk to customers. The robot retails for about $37,000.
Perhaps the future during this employee shortage that we've been facing right now in restaurants across the province. Okay, thanks so much for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. I'm your host, Anita Bathe. And if you're not already doing so, you can always find our program live on our free app. It's called CBC Gem. You can also catch us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. The big tobacco jaw-dropping moment of truth. That's how one senator is describing the testimony of a former Facebook employee. What the whistleblower had to say next. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. A PEI business that makes cider is on the hunt to find the perfect wild apple. As Sheehan Desjardins reports, tasters are sampling one from every tree they can find.
Brandon Friends really enjoys apples, even though it doesn't look like it.
So an apple that you bite into and it kind of makes you gag or want to vomit because it's so sour, or just leaves your mouth so dry you can't even swallow or anything. Those are actually the ideal cider apples.
The UPEI student is testing the fruit, and while dessert apples are often sweet, shiny, and polished, the type he's looking for are wild and unpredictable.
I sample probably about 20 to 50 apples a day. I bite into it and I'll go, that's very interesting. It's very flavorful, or it's very dry.
There are thousands of apples from hundreds of trees at the Double Hill Cidery, but
our mission is to find that perfect tree, that one tree.
The goal is to create the ideal PEI cider. To do that, someone has to taste one wild apple off every single tree.
Just like I'm different from my parents, there's part of each of them in me, and I look different from them and I act different from them. It's the same thing with apples, but on a more extreme scale. So all of these wild apples are completely unique.
Once this round is done, researchers will bring them to the lab for more testing. Top contenders will eventually be grafted onto trees already in the orchard.
I think Brandon has tested at least hundreds of trees. He's bitten into hundreds of different apples. Most of them are either too early, too acidic, not interesting, bland, not flavorful, lacking tannins. But some that he's found are really, really interesting.
With more left to check, Vrenz isn't giving up yet.
I have a few that I think would make really good, could be added to the blend of ciders, but I'm still on the hunt for the perfect apple.
So as the search continues, a reminder that maybe that sour apple tree in your yard is not full of bad apples. Maybe it's just full of cider apples. Sheehan Desjardins, CBC News, Caledonia.
A former Facebook data scientist is claiming the social media giant enforces a system that puts profits before people. Mukta Gabriselassie brings us the details from the whistleblower's testimony before the U.S. Senate, where she accuses Facebook's products of harming children, fueling division, and weakening American democracy.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you.
Frances Haugen was very clear that public safety and democracy is on the line here. She said Facebook knows that misinformation, threats, and other forms of harm are spreading on the company's platforms, and that the well-being and mental health of young people is at risk. Now, she got emotional at one point hearing how Instagram has changed the life of a teenage girl. The chair of the subcommittee read a message that he received during the hearing from a father who said his daughter loved her body before Instagram. Now she has body dysmorphia, including anorexia. We saw Haugen wipe a tear away as that message was being read out loud. Now, throughout her testimony, she said the company knows about the harm that is being caused and is choosing not to put solutions into action, instead putting profits first. So she's calling on Congress to act, including addressing a current law that protects the company from being legally responsible for what people post.
Facebook should not get a free pass on choices it makes to prioritize growth and virality and reactiveness over public safety. They shouldn't get a free pass on that because they're paying for their profits right now with our safety.
In the end, she says the buck stops with the company head, Mark Zuckerberg. We haven't heard from him yet, but listen to the message this senator had for him.
Your time of invading our privacy, promoting toxic content, and preying on children and teens is over. We will not allow your company to harm our children and our families and our democracy any longer.
After the hearing, the company released a statement online saying Howden didn't have any direct knowledge of the reports during her less than 2 years as a product manager, that they don't agree with her characterization, but do agree on one thing, that it is time to create standard rules for the internet. Mukta Gabriselassie, CBC News, Washington.
A Quebec coroner has released details of an inquiry into the death of Joyce Echaquan, an Indigenous woman who died in hospital last year. She says racism and prejudice contributed to the death of the mother of 7. As Simon Nakaneshny reports, the coroner concludes that her death could have been prevented.
Joyce Echaquan's cause of death was pulmonary edema, excess fluid in the lungs. But when asked if the Atikamekw woman would still be alive if she were white, coroner Jeanne Kamel didn't hesitate.
Je pense que oui.
Her report chronicles a kind of tunnel vision by hospital staff fed by prejudice that prevented Echaquan from getting proper medical care when she arrived in an ambulance last September, complaining of worsening stomach pain. According to the coroner, the mother of 7 was quickly labeled a drug addict, a label that stuck to her even though the only narcotics she took were prescribed and in insufficient quantities to cause dependency. And Kamel writes that medical staff were overheard saying they were relieved Echaquan died, so she'd no longer be an inconvenience, piling on slurs and racist tropes about Indigenous women in the process. The coroner says had Echaquan not herself live-streamed an exchange where 2 staff members mocked her with racist remarks, none of this would have come to light because the system would have closed ranks.
Si vous me posez la question, moi, en tant que coroner, est-ce que j'ai l'impression qu'il y a eu du racisme systémique en ce qui concerne Mme Joyce Echaquan? La réponse est oui, c'est indéniable.
Kamel heard from 44 witnesses during her inquiry, but said the hardest part was seeing Echaquan's daughter before her.
Vous imaginez que les derniers moments passés auprès de sa maman, ça a été pour la réconforter en Atikamekw.
For members of Echaquan's family, today was a small step towards finding the truth.
Notre guérison passera aussi par l'espoir que d'autres familles comme la nôtre n'auront pas à vivre ce que nous avons vécu, ce que nous continuons de vivre.
The coroner made several recommendations to the regional health authority that oversees the Joliette Hospital, notably to ensure Atikamekw cultural liaisons are more present in patient care. But her only recommendation for the province is to recognize systemic racism in the health system and other institutions, something Premier Legault again refused to do today. Kamel wouldn't address politicians directly, but had advice for those who continue to deny the existence of systemic discrimination. She said to read her report in its entirety, because it's hard to deny the facts when they're right in front of you. Simon Nakaneshny, CBC News, Trois-Rivières.
In France, a report on sexual abuse within the Catholic Church has landed like an earthquake. Not only does it estimate 330,000 victims abused by clergy and others over the course of decades, as Megan Williams explains, the report also documents a culture in the Church of indifference and cover-ups.
L'Église catholique, c'est une grande famille spirituelle.
Olivier Savignac was sexually abused by a French priest when he was 13.
Oui, c'est un ouragan, et oui, c'est un tsunami.
He calls the report released today a tsunami, so damning it can't be denied. More than 300,000 French children like him were abused by the Catholic Church, the report estimates, 2/3 by priests.
Les violences sexuelles dans l'Église catholique.
The head of the commission who wrote the report says abuse has declined in the past 20 years, but he says sexual violence in the Catholic Church is not a thing of the past.
Les victimes des laïcs en mission d'église.
The 2,500-page report includes damning evidence from church, court, and police archives, as well as interviews with witnesses, like this other priest sex abuse survivor.
Il n'y a aucune culture
who calls the Catholic Church an organization of concealment of crimes against children.
Contre des enfants.
Et donc le pardon que je le demande de tout mon cœur.
The head of France's bishops offers an apology on behalf of his church, which he says needs to be purified. The report calls for the training of clerics on how to prevent abuse and policies that recognize victims and offer financial compensation. The French Church says it's committed to deep reform.
Moi, j'ai été reconnu en mon temps.
Savignac says compensation isn't about sweeping the issue away, but reflecting the level of suffering he and others faced.
Nobody here at the Vatican would give any interviews today, but the Vatican did release a statement. It said Pope Francis was pained by the contents of the report and that his first thoughts went to the victims. But those who have been devastated by this sexual abuse within the Catholic Church say they're tired of the talk. They want action and they want change. Megan Williams, CBC News, the Vatican.
Alberta has been ravaged by the fourth wave, and a lot of infections are being found in kids who can't be vaccinated. BC is among the provinces to have recently added measures to keep COVID out of classrooms. And as Julia Wong shows us, Alberta is now following suit.
9-year-old Raven was excited to go back to school this fall, but for her mother, anxiety was building. Kids started getting sick in Raven's Edmonton school, so her mom pulled her from in-person learning. That same day, Raven started showing symptoms. She tested positive for COVID-19.
The anger started hitting.
Days later, her school forced to shut down for 2 weeks. The province had only been contact tracing in so-called high-risk areas like hospitals and continuing care, not in schools.
If the kids in that classroom and the teacher in that classroom had been notified and had isolated, then it wouldn't have spread through the school.
But that is changing.
We are announcing new measures today to help to slow and prevent transmission at schools.
The province will ramp up rapid testing, publicly report outbreaks again, and bring back contact tracing, a move the Alberta Teachers Association says is too little, too late.
Schools have been flying blind essentially since school started in September.
The return of tracing should lower case counts, but that may not relieve stress on the hospital system, says this pediatric infectious disease physician.
Not at all clear whether the majority of those people were exposed to children who acquired COVID in schools.
As for Hill, she's upset her family is in this situation in the first place.
Because this just didn't have to happen.
She and her husband also tested positive. Both were fully vaccinated. They will be out of quarantine next Monday, just in time for Raven to go back to school after Thanksgiving. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
An all-female orchestra silenced. Now the Taliban occupies the school they once were taught in. Meet the members of Zora next.
They can be some of nature's most dangerous beasts, and more these days, they're treading into foreign territory, our territory. Here's Terry Malewski now on a new campaign to make British Columbia residents more bear-aware.
If there were any doubt that Canada's not quite as civilized as we'd like to think, look at what it's been like in North Vancouver all year long. That's a wildlife officer trying to scare a young black bear up a tree. He's hoping to tranquilize and remove the animal, but the bear has other plans. He just wanders off through the local playground. It happens all the time.
See him?
Vancouver's North Shore is the priciest real estate in Canada, but it borders on bear country, and more than ever this year, it looks like it. Officers have been on the run constantly. In this case, a 200-pound male led a hectic chase across a busy highway and ended up near a school. The officers had no choice but to shoot to kill.
The clash of humans and bears is quickly becoming more dangerous. This past summer, in the heavily populated lower mainland of British Columbia, wildlife officers fielded about 1,000 bear calls. That is triple last year's number. The problem, they say, is not an influx of bears, but of humans and of the garbage that they bring with them.
We're getting really generations of bears that are garbage junkies. And we can't keep doing that.
There it is.
The provincial government is trying to convince people to secure their trash so bears don't get a taste for it. But at Whistler, Canada's top ski resort, they've already put an electric fence around the dump and the bears just look elsewhere. This one was caught munching on a backyard bird feeder. She was tranquilized and removed, but if she comes back, she'll be shot. British Columbia is one of the last places on Earth where black bears are not endangered. Grizzly bears are declining and listed as vulnerable, but experts say if bears and people cannot keep their distance, the bears will lose.
We have got a problem with man moving into all the habitat of the creatures, and we need endangered species legislation. We need better ways of handling the way humans and animals interact.
So far in the fast-growing suburbs of BC, the interaction is not going well. Terry Malewski, CBC News, Vancouver.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
And so we have to respond to that by saying it isn't a 1 in 1,000 event any longer. It's our current reality, and make ourselves more resilient.
A new report finds the province failed to protect the elderly and people with disabilities during BC's record-breaking heat wave this summer. Human Rights Watch says the hundreds of deaths that happened could have been prevented. COVID-19 vaccines will soon be mandatory for roughly 30,000 employees in BC's public service. Also, long-term care workers who are unvaccinated by end of day on October 12th will have to take a mandatory leave of absence without pay. And we now know a third COVID shot will be given to even more people who are considered vulnerable in this province. BC is changing its training for truck drivers. A minimum of 140 hours of instruction will be required starting October 14th before a full license can be obtained. Prior to this, the only requirement was 2 written tests and air brake training. The move is being applauded by the parents of one of the boys killed in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash 3 years ago. Well, as Afghanistan faces a difficult new reality under Taliban rule, our CBC team is on the ground inside the country. Tonight, a story of both heartbreak and resilience centered around the fate of one of Afghanistan's most precious jewels, an all-female orchestra created at a time when peace and hope seemed within reach.
There they were a few years ago, invited to perform at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. A heady moment and a dream realized for Zora, Afghanistan's first all-women's orchestra. From those so thrilled to be there then, a message for you now. Listen to them. Remember these smiles and sounds, because this is the Afghanistan they want you to know. Not this one. When the Taliban took over this summer, the cacophony of violence and chaos silenced all the sweet notes, especially here. The famed music school, built in 2010 as a place of promise for those emerging from life under the Taliban's grip. For young women in particular, it was a refuge. Now the girls are gone. Taliban fighters infest those colorful halls. It's become a militia base, armed men lurking in treasured spaces where music education once meant wings.
Today, the performance of this young musician clearly demonstrated how easily music can be understood by every single man and woman of this planet.
Building, then nurturing the school was Dr. Ahmed Sarmas' purpose in life.
This orchestra for me always was as a symbol of freedom, symbol of emancipation of women.
He is now, though, stuck, looking on from afar, in Australia when we spoke. Got there in the summer for medical treatment, unable to go back since he spends days and nights checking on his students.
We've been fully in the process of getting our students to a safety and security. I advise them to delete all the messages, deactivate their Facebooks, do not connect with friends outside Afghanistan.
Some have gone into hiding. Others, like conductor Zarifa Adiba, had left a few years earlier to go to university abroad. Her friends, family back in Afghanistan, while she sits in Kyrgyzstan. And it haunts. Their text messages are hard to take.
I don't have quite good words to describe how these days and nights are passing.
I suppose there's a difference between existing and living.
Exactly. Like everything is just like a movie, like a horror movie that is going on, you know? So I see my friends they are breaking their instruments. They're breaking it before Taliban get to them, you know? So for them, I don't think that music is at the moment their comfort, but it's more of a risk for them.
Music once filled the mountains and valleys and streets and souls of Afghans. Decades ago, when the Taliban took control, they banned it. And now that they're back in charge, public performances are once more outlawed. The Afghan folk singer Fawad Andarbi was pulled from his home and killed by the Taliban not long ago. Imagine the chill that sends to the young women of Zora, alternately afraid of and cherishing the power of music.
Music has always been my friend, has always been my comfort, even especially in times like this that I feel hopeless, I feel tired, I feel scared.
As conductor, Zarifa was a leader, working with, learning with the likes of pianist Maram Ati. She moved to the music school as a teen, worked with Dr. Sarmast for years, touring with Zora. Then a few days before Kabul fell, she left for university in Michigan to study piano. Her heart clearly still at home and with friends now asking for help and advice.
I just told them that don't tell anyone, don't play if someone of the neighbor could hear a piano playing or something, just don't touch it.
And be careful. She sadly urges those back in Afghanistan not to fight too hard to save the music.
Fighting now is not a good idea. If someone just stood up and fight for music, you cannot do that right now. But I think all of this 20 years of hard work, it cannot go to waste like that. So maybe in the future, I believe that someone or people will just start from the beginning again.
That is for the future. This moment is for surviving. Dr. Sarmast has been helping his students as best as he possibly can. A few, like Mara, managed to leave a few days before the Taliban takeover. Getting others out now is exhausting and stressful. And for the women, dreams waver between trying to hold the memory of the togetherness they once had, the bold performances of traditional songs, and hoping to somewhere, someday, let the music's power speak again.
Every note talks to me and tells me that Zarifa, don't give up. Zarifa, play more, play louder. At the same time that my violin is peaceful, comforting, and beautiful, at the same time, it is so powerful and so strong and so rebellious, you know?
Zarifa's new life includes this new violin.
Beautiful.
Bought with help from supporters. She was just starting to get acquainted with it.
This is going to be my weapon, you know? Taliban are having their weapon, but this is my weapon. I will talk to you guys with this.
The Taliban scattered and silenced the orchestra, but the spirit of Zora lives, and the women promise they will be heard again.
It's a whole new type of space race, and the Russians are ahead, making movies in orbit. That's next. And at 6:44, you're looking at a live shot of Grouse Mountain. On the weather menu, well, a whole lot of drizzle, but Johanna is also serving up a side of risk of thunderstorms, the chance of boom next.
Hang on one sec. This guy's got money. I know he does. I actually think the motor was rebuilt, but I don't know. Basically, I could tell you the story on 99.9% of them. A couple were just random cars that When I bought the other property up there, there was 3 or 4 cars, so I don't know the history. It just, I ended up with them, but just about everyone else. I mean, that one I got off a guy that had a 64 door. That one came from Prince George. This one I got off my buddy. Another buddy of mine from Prince George sold me 2 of these. That one came from Chilliwack. The wagons, a buddy sold me that Mercury Bobcat, which is kind of funky, came from a buddy I bought 5 or 6 cars off of. Somebody stole the fenders off it. There's a couple, $3,000-4,000 bucks worth of new chrome in there. Yeah. So, I mean, come to the bill of sale. This is the way I bought it. Here, this way. Okay, yeah, here, you go this way, I'll go that way. You're young, I'm old. No.
Yeah, tell me about this guy.
This one here, 1965 Chrysler Windsor. We were doing a slope stabilization job down across from Balfour. You know where you take the ferry? Yeah. Go across. So I spotted the back end of this car under a tree. So we went and talked to the guys. So this is 1965. Well, these 2 brothers from Saskatchewan drove this car out there in 1972, and they parked it under that tree. So when I saw it, it had already been parked for 35 years. I've owned it about 20 years. So this thing's been parked for almost 50 years. I lose my keys and my phone 4 times a day, but for some strange reason, I remember the cars. Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, I got a head for numbers. I don't remember faces or where I put my car keys, but the car stuff is just, I don't know, it just sticks with me because this is my passion, right? Almost like Rain Man, an idiot savant with the emphasis on idiot. I'm going to be 65 years old soon. I mean, I've already lived 5 years longer than my dad did. I mean, this is my dream. It's my obsession. I don't want to, I mean, I've watched friends die, and then their wives and their families have to deal with their problems. I mean, I'm going to leave my family enough problems. This is one that I think I should kind of tidy up. I mean, this one here has a pink ribbon on it. That's because this one is not for sale. 1964, my dad sold Fords in Vernon. I think it was Chillum Motors. Anyway, his uncle came to buy a new Ford 4-door because he had kids. And he said, Stan, I want it to go. So they special ordered a solid lifter, Police Interceptor 390 motor. So my dad's been dead for 30 years, and I've been dragging this car around for 30 years. I'm not going to restore the car, but there's no way anybody else is getting that engine. I mean, I'm not selling all the cars. I've kept 50, maybe 52. Anyway, I've kept a full deck of cards to play with. Like I said, some things you just can't let go of, right? I've caretaken this field of dreams for a long time. I'm hoping 500 people step up. They take one each. I don't care if they use them for parts, they use them for lawn art, they restore them, as long as they just don't get crushed. Because, I mean, a lot of these cars wouldn't be here if I didn't have my obsession. Addicted to rust.
It's a movie set location where no crew has filmed before, space. The Russian Space Agency launched an actress and a director into orbit earlier today, where Russia warps ahead of the U.S. in another type of space race, becoming the first to make a feature film. As Briar Stewart reports, this potentially opens a new frontier of commercialization.
Start.
Rocket launches are made for TV moments, but long before the countdown, this one was already a spectacle. A reality show documented Russia's search for a leading lady to star in the first feature film shot on the International Space Station. Yulia Peresild, a well-known Russian actress, was chosen after being tested in scenarios designed to simulate the force of takeoff and the weightlessness of space. Afterwards, she and the director of the film were given a few months of cosmonaut training. We are prepared as well as it's possible to get prepared, she said. This is an experiment. She will be playing a surgeon who has to perform a life-saving operation on the International Space Station. A veteran cosmonaut is leading the mission, and time was of the essence. Because Tom Cruise and NASA are also reportedly pairing up to make a movie on the space station. So, like many of history's great missions, this one was driven by competition and pride. The movie and the reality show are all an attempt to drum up excitement around Russia's space program. There's even an online tool that lets you launch a rocket and fly it over your social media videos. But despite the cutesy gimmicks, there are some real concerns around this project. Some say it's at best a vanity project, at worst a distraction from legitimate space exploration.
So this is kind of as Americans call it, low-hanging fruit. I am not the only one who is having this kind of, how to say it, party pooper opinion.
It was a beautiful time, my time inside International Space Station.
Andrei Borisenko supports the idea of making movies in orbit. He spent months on the space station and says the first week of weightlessness can be the toughest.
I've
observed many on the space station, he said, and I can say there can really be some problems. But the team was all smiles when they arrived, describing the trip so far as a dream, as they started to get used to the idea of floating around their new movie set. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Moscow.
A vanity project, maybe, but Joe, I feel like you aren't taking the party pooper stance on this one.
I was just going to say, Anita, I don't know why I haven't got my email asking for a meteorologist who has never acted before to head to space. I know it's in here somewhere. I'm going to check the junk mail. Until then, I'll just stick to regular forecasting. Let me take you to the current temperatures. I don't have warm temperatures in the forecast this week. It's a below seasonal next few days. Starting with 13 right now at YVR. That's about our high over the next couple of days. 11's out towards Abbotsford, 12 in through Hope. So all a couple of degrees below our seasonal of 15 for this time of the year, based on our last 30-year average anyway. Taking you through the forecast daily highs for the interior, Williams Lake is sort of up towards the modified Arctic air mass that we're seeing. Definitely in quotation marks. This isn't a true Arctic air mass, really just the coldest air of the season. But we're seeing that chill filter down across much of the province as I take you through Friday and into the weekend. Low to mid-teens is pretty much the best any of us can do through most of the week. And you can see YVR's trend as well, staying below that seasonal mark for the next few days. We'll get some cool nights as well in through the single digits. So that's all thanks to this circulating low that's pushing inland as we speak. And when that cold low moves over land, that's when we get our thunderstorm risk. So we are watching for thunderstorms across the south coast, sort of mid-morning and early afternoon, our best shot. That low will taper as it tracks across the interior, so not bringing much rain to the interior. We get a bit of a break day Thursday for the south coast, but look at what's coming for the end of the week. A brand new cold front, and that is going to be bringing some snow to the northwest, and we'll have to keep an eye on what that does. Snow levels right now for the rest of the week, staying well above our local mountains, although we might see some flakes fly at the top of Cypress and Seymour. Nothing too accumulating at this point. Snow levels down around 1,400 meters tomorrow in through Kelowna, so we may see some flakes on the tops of the mountain passes. 7 is your high in through Prince George, and yes, that wet snow you've seen now will continue through tomorrow morning. So I've got our thunderstorm risk here, just a high of 12 for tomorrow. Where we don't see the thunderstorms, and not all of us will, it is a wet Wednesday. Get ready for a day of rain before our break day Thursday. Few scattered showers at this point on Friday. Anita, Saturday's looking like a bit of a washout. Good day to stay indoors and watch movies, no matter where they're located.
A good week to stay indoors and watch
Yeah,
movies.
exactly. Good advice.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Hey, Lego. It's not just for kids anymore. In fact, one man has taken his passion for the tiny plastic bricks and made it his job. That's next.
Today we have a cook-off. It's part of our celebration of the Nigerian week. It's kind of a way of celebrating the 61st Independence Day back home in Nigeria. But today we have a cook-off and we have contestants who are making one of the many Nigerian dishes today called egusi and poundo yam. So egusi is basically melon. That's what we call, that's the English name for egusi, right? So it's melon soup and pounder yam. So pounder yam would basically be a kind of yams back in Nigeria. And then you cook it up and then you mash it and then you pound it. Kind of looks like mashed potatoes.
Where I come from, we like to have it watery. And some have it lumpy, some have it fried before cooking, and some just add it to water, add the pepper and all the spices, and we are good to go. But one thing about egusi is it's one of the food that cut across every part of Nigeria. The northern part will cook it in a different way, the southern people cook it in a different way, but one good thing is it still have that taste, it doesn't lose its taste. And we all enjoy our egusi.
This is particular because it is a common dish amongst the 3 tribes in Nigeria. So the Hausas, the Igbos, the Yorubas, they all make this dish, but they all make it a different way, right? So you would use it in weddings, you would use it at dinners. I have kids, 2 of them. It's very important that they know where mommy comes from, because that's where they come from. It's also very important that they know what the people do, what they like, what they eat, the language they speak. So yeah, it's really important because we do not get to go back to Nigeria often. That's really expensive. Having this little community here, you know, practicing and trying to preserve all of these traditions is very important to me, because that way my kids get to see it and they kind of know exactly what it's like to be Nigerian. It's not exactly the same as being in Nigeria, but it's close, you know, to exposing them to what it's like to be a Nigerian.
There's no loser, there's no winner here. We're just coming to just showcase our culture. This is not like you're competing for money or for car or for anything. We're just coming to show love and everything, and that's all. Overall, love is the key. So we are brothers, we're sisters. Yeah, that's it.
You are just here to have the fun.
Yeah, the fun. Yeah.
Part of the activities marking our 61st
independence
anniversary. So it's good. We'll cook to the best of our ability, and we pray. We hope people enjoy it.
From the Millennium Falcon to Hogwarts Castle, millions of kids and adults love building things out of Lego. But a man in rural Nova Scotia has taken his love of the colorful little blocks a giant step further. As Elizabeth McMillan explains, he's built his passion into a full-time business.
In a corner of his home in Middle Musquodoboit, Jason Pyatt transforms tiny bricks into custom creations. He does Lego commissions. Some cost tens of thousands of dollars and take weeks to complete. His work started out as a way to encourage local kids to think beyond the instructions that came with Lego sets.
I thought it was a pity that kids weren't able to understand the creative expression that Lego could bring out. So I started a little workshop here in this studio.
So many kids were interested, he ended up leading a robotics club at his daughter's elementary school. And online, people started noticing his work. Requests started coming in.
It's not just collectors. I'm doing work for Google. I'm doing work for a lot of startup companies. So it's been quite overwhelming at the same time as being absolutely rewarding.
Pyatt shifted to running a business. Now he manages a team of 8 designers in different countries. His latest project, replicating a historic mansion in Indiana. It's made up of 64,000 pieces, and it weighs about 60 kilograms.
And you can see the door inside there, and handrails.
Pyatt is driving the model to the U.S., Before leaving, he displayed it at the school where he volunteered.
Sometimes kids don't feel that there's a place for them where they fit. And so once they get alongside Jason, that's affirming for them. There's a space for them and they get to shine. And yeah, his enthusiasm just is infectious.
For Payette, the goal remains sparking people's imagination and reminding his community they're not limited by being in rural Nova Scotia. Elizabeth McMillan, CBC News, Middle Musquodoboit.
That is it for our show tonight. You can always find it online, cbc.ca/BC. And if you want more local news, Dan Burritt is here at 11 o'clock after the National. Good night.